Thank you very much. This is a very welcome opportunity. When I was asked to reply to a paper by Mary, I followed her work over the last 10 or 15 years. It's been very valuable going back to your time in the INOU, and I want to come back to that actually. And also Orla O'Connor and Siobhan O'Donoghue. I've valued working with you and Nesk and other places in the past. I want to say something briefly on terms of the economic debate. Padar mentioned one of the problems in terms of the media reporting what certain economists say, but I think there's a different angle to it. I remember talking to one economist whose work I value, although I normally disagree with them, from University College Dublin, and he said to me that he had appeared in Morning Ireland and his head of department said, as soon as he heard him, why'd you waste your time? Your job is to produce academic publications. And there is a real problem that university economists in this island and in the neighbouring island, that the incentives are not to appear on the radio or television. You're docked marks if you do. So that fortunately in the SRI, part of our job is to communicate our results to the outside public. And we're inundated by journalists saying, look, we can't get any. I say, go to the universities, and they say they won't come. So there is an issue in terms of debate, which is, I think, important in Ireland. Civil society is extremely important, and I'm interested. Recently, in the last month, one government department who funds some of our research said to us, would we write articles in the newspaper explaining what we're doing, even if we were saying the minister was mad? Well, they didn't quite put it that way. But they felt that there was a need for debate, that policy making, that difficult policies will only be adopted if wider civil society think that it's a good thing. So that I think that what you are doing is important. You won't make policy, but you will influence policy. In terms of models of Irish economic development, the models which I would draw on would be rather different, I think among a lot of economists there's a feeling that, first of all, Ireland made major mistakes. Cormac McGraw, in an interesting article, said it wasn't the Irish success story, it was the Irish failure story for 50 years that was interesting. That we closed ourselves to the outside world. When we went for globalisation, we went for it in a way that we got a lot out of it, unlike some other countries. And it's been a success story for Ireland. There'd be different emphasis on the importance of FDI, which you talk about in your paper. Frank Barry in UCD would say that's where everything is. I think myself and say Brendan Walsh and Patrick Honohan in Brookings paper would say no, it's important, but don't overemphasize it. For me, something that was really important was education. That research in the late 80s, early 90s showed that every kid who left school without any qualifications was destined to spend half their life unemployed, or half them would spend all of their lives unemployed. The state did something about that, and I think that's been important in the progress that has been made. On income distribution, I think that's very interesting what you bring together information and data in your chapters 2 and 3, showing that the income distribution has remained very unequal in Ireland. But one thing which you do mention, but I do think is important, because it highlights the issue of policy, that the distribution of wages has actually narrowed significantly over the period. The market delivered a narrowing of the gap between those with low qualifications and those with high qualifications, partly because they reduced the number of people with low qualifications by keeping them in education, and that was very important, and it made a contribution which, other things being equal, might have made an impact on the distribution of income. However, it's the rest of its policy which meant that while wage rates might be narrowing, that you did not see this in terms of incomes. And it does highlight that this isn't just an issue of market forces, it's an issue of public policy and is potentially changeable. One of the other things is, and I think this is important, that it's really at the top end where things have been going on, and at the top end of the income distribution. And I want to then the second part I want to say is addressing, if you like, the crisis which we now face, and the things changed in September. In that until September, we were in a mess of our own making, which was predictable, which was warned about, but which was driven by public policy, which was ill thought out, promoting the building and construction industry, and one of the things, I think, even if you look at income distribution, you don't get the full effects of what was going on, because it's the distribution of wealth. That the people who made money out of the boom and have money today are the people who sold land. It was the transfer of resources from those who needed houses on middle incomes to those who had land was a very important part. And the incomes related to that property development, that what was going on at the top end. For example, the decision to reduce the rate of corporation capital gains tax on development land by McCreevy, I think was an extremely unfortunate, along with a whole series of other measures, promoting an unsustainable economy. We now face a problem where this economy is profoundly uncompetitive because the building construction was like a sector, it was like a cancer. It squeezed out everything else in the economy. Fortunately, it's a cancer that's treatable. Maybe it's not malignant, but it squeezed out the rest of the economy and made us uncompetitive. How do we make ourselves competitive? It is by wage rates growing more slowly than in other countries. The problem is that we now face low inflation. If prices are going to fall next year, I'm not sure, in a lot of places I know the private sector wage rates are going to fall, but I'm not sure that they will on average. But we're facing a major problem of pricing ourselves back into the markets. And we also face a major problem with the public finances. But one of the things we're going to see as a result of this blunders, now the government have also been unfortunate. They didn't sort of September, Lehman Brothers and the financial crisis wasn't of their making. But it means that from now on, we're facing major problems on top of the problems that we made. But we're likely to see unemployment rising above 10%. We may be lucky if it tops out below 12%. And one of the implications of this, in your paper, you emphasize income distribution, but put less emphasis on the progress on consistent poverty measures. And the progress on consistent poverty is because of the fall in unemployment. And the damage done by mismanagement of policy, giving rise to unemployment rates of 10 to 12% in the next 2-3 years, I think consistent poverty is going to rise very considerably. And I think that, Mary, you need to dust off all your work in the INOU on how how a welfare system deals with the situation where you have falling wage rates, where the gap between what people can get on the market and what people can get in welfare, who are in a bad way, how you deal with this problem. I think we all need to be dusting off our files because we're facing a new situation in that regard. In terms of the public finances, there's a crisis of competitiveness, which we will eventually, the question is how rapidly we'll price ourselves back into the markets, and I don't know the answer on that one. There is also a separate crisis in the public finances. We've got to put the two together, put the two right together. The problem with public finances is there's a bloody massive hole because they relied on tax revenue from property, which was paid for when people bought their houses. That income is no longer there. What are we going to do about it? We could cut expenditure dramatically. Now, my view is if the people of Ireland are going to want the same quality of education and health services as we have today in 5 years' time, you don't fire nurses and hire them again. You don't fire teachers and hire them again. It's bloody expensive and wasteful. So you've got to decide in 5 years' time what level of public expenditure do you want? And it's unlikely to be lower as a share of GDP, could possibly be a bit higher than it is today. In which case, yes, we need to cut public expenditure where it is doing a bad job, where there's bureaucracy that's unnecessary, for example, the health service. There are a range of areas where we can make savings, but the bulk of the problem is probably going to have to be addressed through higher taxation. Now, we're not going to see it next year, but in 2010, 11, 12, there will have to be a very substantial rise in taxation to provide for even the level of public services that we have at present. And the question is how we do this. There are different ways of doing it, and I think that that's going to be a major issue for policy. And if you like, the Department of Finance didn't ask me to come and talk to you, but they're not the people who asked us. They're not too keen on people criticising what they do. But there is an issue for civil society, that there's a crisis out there, and you need to influence how we get out of this mess. Where would be your emphasis? I know where my emphasis would be. I'm really concerned about the issue of consistent poverty in the bottom end, but other people will have different emphasis. So we're going to need a lot more taxation. There will have to be cuts. My emphasis would be less on the cuts than on the taxation. And the final thing is, and Peadar mentioned the environment. One of the things I think the issue of the environment is very important, but one of the problems in doing something with it is the people who will be badly hit by doing something are disproportionately those on low incomes and certain large companies. And the two of them together have shanghaied policy on this so far, so nothing happened. the work which we have done suggests that you can do something on global warming, but you also need to take account of it in welfare benefits and so on. The big problem is people on low incomes who are in employment. But something needs, if we're going to do something, it's going to be expensive. And the people who will pay a higher proportion of their income, unless something is done about it, will be those on low incomes. So I think that the environment is important, but that's another area of policy that we need to consider for the future, how we're going to do something about it and how we do it in a way that is acceptable to us. Thank you.